Hello and welcome back to Mid-East in Depth. Sabrina Hersi Issa writes in the Gulf News that to end the refugee crisis, we need more than grief. She claims we are increasingly reliant on searing images as our collective wake-up calls to problems we have long known existed, but about which we have done little. And on the other side of those images is brokenness and personal grief. She states many in America and Europe are now publicly mourning for the Kurdi family, one example of lives senselessly lost amid an extreme tragedy and our moral failing to prevent it. She adds, it has been more than 3 years since human rights groups confirmed the Syrian government's use of cluster bombs in an attack that killed children. But it was the image of one dead child on what his parents had hoped would be the shores to offer them safety that reminded even migration-averse politicians and their constituents of a forgotten war and the long-standing refugee crisis they had all but quietly ignored. She writes that the world reacts and asks, what do we need to do to stop this insanity? But the answers are hardly as simple as the questions. We must drastically reform how governments and institutions treat those brave enough to flee from war and conflict, whether Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Tunisia, Somalia, or anywhere else. To continue to underfund, undermine and ignore humanitarian fallout from Britain's military actions and foreign policy failings is moral malpractice. Public grief can be an opportunity for growth, but ultimately public grief is just emotional voyeurism when we fail to care beyond being sad for the victims of the tragedies that our governments helped create and which we continually ignore. Ian Birrell comments in The Independent that while politicians let down those fleeing war, people help them up. Birrell highlights in his years of covering migration, 3 things stand out for him. The first is the appalling indifference of the self-serving political classes to the tide of human misery washing up on Europe's shores, which seems all the more callous given our nation's recent military actions swelled the number of refugees escaping blood-stained chaos in the Middle East. The second is the extraordinary friendliness and politeness of desperate people whose lives have been devastated, so often happy to discuss their plight despite suffering terrible tragedies and unspeakable horrors. The third is something less tangible, but one he defines as the big society. It is a vivid display of individuals doing good deeds and filling gaps in public provision. He writes, migration is among the defining issues of our age. So their stance, the politicians, has been both morally wrong and politically dangerous, not least when, beneath headline polls showing strong feelings over immigration in general, the same surveys find much less concern from people over how it impacts on their community, their lives and their voting. The journalist concludes, how curious the big society is, in perhaps its purest manifestation, has come back to bite a government led by David Cameron with such sharp teeth. Perhaps this is just a blip of compassion before the bile starts flowing again in our corrosive public debate on migration. For more updates, please visit levant.tv and subscribe to Mid-East In Depth on iTunes. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.